Congratulations. You are all contestants in the ultimate reality game show. Here are the rules. You're going to wake up tiny on a small rock in an infinite space. Your memory has been completely erased, and you have no idea how to think, speak, or move. You're going to learn everything about playing the game from within the game itself. Now, unfortunately, there are an infinite number of rules, so you're never going to be able to figure out what they all are. The important thing is to note that they fall into two categories. The first category are real rules, natural, unbreakable, like gravity, a mysterious force that drags everything around the game board to the game, keeping us in the game, making it impossible to escape. The other category of rules are invented rules, things that other players and contestants just make up off the top of their head. An example of an invented rule in my country, you're not allowed to light certain plants on fire and then inhale the smoke coming off that plant in the privacy of your own room. If you do that, you are in danger of other players coming crashing through the window with guns and putting you in a cage for an untold period of time, leaving you completely bewildered. Now, this state of being bewildered is something that is common to the game, because all the players are locked inside one game piece for the entire duration of the game, which leads some players to believe that it's the game piece itself that's the obstacle to having any understanding of what's going on in this game. Many players also believe that we have no idea what the nature is of the game designer. We call that designer by many names: God, Allah, Yahweh, science, a random scattering of carbon-based particles. Be careful what words you use, because other players might hear you, get offended at those rules, and try to kill you. The game is very dangerous, so you need to be careful. Every game piece comes with a mystery time limit, and you have no idea when that time limit is going to expire. So listen, it's really important that you try to win the game as quickly as you possibly can. Here's the problem. How do you win the game? Is there a finish line somewhere that someone's supposed to cross? Is it about, conquering all the other players in the game? Somehow that doesn't seem right. When I was a kid, I used to ponder this question a lot. What is the objective of this game? I thought probably it's just to have fun. I mean, as a kid, I was blessed with two players as parents who were kind and generous, and although we grew up poor, we were homeless a couple times, we had to crash on the couches of friends and other family members. We invented our own rules. If we couldn't afford toys, for example, we'd make our own out of found objects. We did the best we could to ease each other's suffering. We cared for one another. You could say that it was a time of peace. Well, that period went away very quickly when I found myself in the public school system and moved from one room to the next at the sound of a bell every hour, learning some abstract things that seemed to have something to do with the world I lived in. But at 10 years old, I had a lot of questions that were not being answered, like, where does food come from? And how come it always arrives in like a plastic carton? And where does that plastic and paper go? And how does electricity work? And how do you talk to girls? And if the electricity goes out, then what happens? Like, how do we survive? And what are the implications of having every aspect of our lives dependent on an infrastructure that we don't have any understanding of? Well, then, one day I did learn something at school that was really amazing, and I ran home and told my mom, and I said, "Mom, you're never going to believe this." And she said, "What?" And I said, "Have you ever seen a black person before?" And she said, she had that bewilderment that one has in the game. And I said, "Yeah, have you ever seen a black person?" And she goes, "Yeah, Matthew, of course, and so have you." And she started naming a lot of my closest friends, Michelle, Don, Evan, and I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I remember being irritated and kind of disappointed because all my friends were definitely various shades of brown, and not a single one of them was black. And I realized something really bizarre about the game. Apparently, the players have divided a very wide array of players into 5 totally inaccurate color categories, and then used those categories to commit a horrific genocide, a racial slavery of a horror that's incalculable. And before I could even kind of wrap my head around that, I found out something else that was disturbing for me. There were these 2 girls that were definitely pink, but they were qualified as white for some reason in my school. They made it clear to me that I was no longer popular Well, I didn't even know what that word meant, but I knew that something bad had happened, and I realized it was my association with kids who were definitely brown, but in the black category. And then something else very strange happened, which was during the holy month of Ramadan. The tradition is that you don't eat so that you can feel less fuel for your passions and desires and feel closer to that inner authentic self. And everyone's looking at me at the school going, "What? You're so weird. Why are you fasting?" And I'm looking at them going, why is nobody fasting? I don't understand what's happening. Because in my house, my father, he was raised as an Irish Protestant. But in his 20s, he converted or adopted some forms of Sufi Islam because he felt that those practices were in best support of his highest good. And my mother, who was of Russian Jewish descent, she also adopted some of those practices. And in our household, we celebrated Christmas. We learned about non-judgment and turning the other cheek. We celebrated Hanukkah. We believed in not any other God before us other than the highest good. And we celebrated Ramadan and found ourselves submitting to the highest power. And it was all about as controversial as choosing, whatever pasta sauce you want on your pasta. So imagine my horror when that year, at 10 years old, it was a big year, I started watching television news and realized that the problems that I was having in my school were nothing compared to the madness that was going on in the world. I mean, religious wars, Holocaust, civil wars, starvation, poverty, the kind of which that made me never want to claim poverty in my life again. And I thought, what is going on here? Why aren't we talking about this at school? I mean, we're in there 7 hours a day. Shouldn't we be trying to figure out how to fix this? I mean, am I totally alone? Because I felt really alone. And then, around 11, I remember my dad took me to see a film. And it was Terry Gilliam's Brazil. And I remember this life-changing event because it was the first time that I saw a representation of the world that made sense to me. Like, here was the madness and the satire of, terrorist explosions going off. Meanwhile, people are eating, dinner in a restaurant. And I felt like maybe I'm not the only one who sees the world crazy as I'm seeing it. Maybe I'm not mad myself and so alone. And there's this great part in the movie, for those of you who've seen it, you'll remember, where Robert De Niro, who plays the real hero, right before he puts a little rope over a zip wire and disappears into the night, he tells the protagonist, who he's just saved from some jam, that he doesn't need any thanks, he doesn't need any money, and he just says, just remember, we're all in this together. And being the sensitive 11-year-old I was, I remember the tears streaming down my face and feeling like, okay, I now have a clue as to what the objective of this game is. If at some point in my life, I can reach out and help someone else know that they're not alone and we're all in this together, then my life will have been worth something. So 20 years later, I have the honor of producing and editing my first feature film, directed by an amazing director, Amy Berg. The film was called Deliver Us from Evil, and it was about the pedophilia, the sex abuse crisis in the Catholic Church. The film was nominated for an Oscar, and it received a number of accolades, which were very encouraging and inspiring to continue my work as a filmmaker, a performer, and so forth. But the really profound, deeper experience was being connected to my inner compass and feeling like I was using every part of myself in a manner that was bringing myself to life and giving me artistic satisfaction. But deeper than that, it was for a higher cause. That this was alleviating suffering because it was giving a voice to people who had previously been silenced. And in that sense, brought a sense of peace toward some of the people who were involved with the film, and certainly some of those who watched and unfortunately had survived similar experiences. And so it was at that moment that I knew for myself what the objective of the game is. World peace. That's it. What is peace? I believe that peace is just what we were talking about. It's freedom from suffering. So not just the suffering from physical violence, of course, but the freedom of suffering from any type of violence. From verbal violence, from the violence that we do to ourselves when we have negative self-talk or doubt or shame. Peace is the freedom of suffering that comes from, of course, being impoverished or being hungry or unemployed, or the suffering that comes from having a life of unfulfilled potential, being in a job that's not in accordance with our true, authentic self. True peace is a freedom from a life of regret, of looking back and thinking, God, I wish I had other choices, or I'd made other choices. Isn't that peace what we want most of all for ourselves, beyond any other objective. And of course, isn't that what we would do anything to give our children and all of our loved ones? So isn't peace actually the most rational objective we could possibly have for the game? And if that's the case, well, right now we're losing. Today, here at TEDx in Vienna, we're presented with a game within a game, a future of unimaginable technological possibilities, but also inequality at a level unseen in history. Well, I mean, I can't even imagine that because I can't fathom inequality as it is today, where 1% of the players on the game board control 90% of the resources. The amount of suffering that takes place because of that, I can't stomach it. Here's the thing about technology. Whenever something's invented, it always comes along with a prediction that it's going to usher in a new era of peace. When the Wright brothers invented the airplane, they thought once people have that 30,000-foot view and they see that we're all the same, they're going to know that we're going to just stop fighting. There's going to be an end to war. Well, imagine now, today, the airplane as a symbol of world peace. I mean, I know what I think of. Or the computer, the great democratizer. It's going to level the playing field. I mean, it's amazing. The computer's fantastic, but when you think about the computer in the context of peace, I mean, I don't know about you guys, I think about drone bombings, I think about Stephen Hawking and his warning that the artificial intelligence monster is going to take over all of our minds in any second. I don't think it's technology that's going to save mankind. It's going to be mankind and we ourselves. I don't think that there's one answer to how to achieve peace. It's not Democrats or Republicans or socialists or communists or one type of religious philosophy or another. To impose one idea on all of us is authoritarianism, and that just always brings more suffering. We're not a one-size-fits-all game piece. I don't think that there's one playbook for how to win the game for 7 billion people, 7 billion players on the planet. I think there's 7 billion playbooks. There's one for every single one of us. It's up to us to find out for ourselves what method, what practice or process is going to bring us peace of mind. What do we need to do to heal the unresolved issues in our hearts so that we can truly feel at peace and bring that peace out into our communities, into our families, into our relationships, and then, of course, into our professions, where the tide is so against peace as an ultimate objective, a freedom from suffering as an ultimate objective. Usually in our professions, it's a totally different interest, self-interest, or someone else's self-interest. But imagine if we could bring that peace as the number one objective as teachers, scientists, lawyers, urban planners, designers, construction workers, waiters, drivers, soldiers, law enforcement officers, border patrol agents, politicians, and of course, voters. Whatever you believe happens, after the mystery time limit of our game piece expires and turns us to ash and dust, there's one thing that we're all going to leave behind, and that's our legacy. What will you do? What will we have done with our time here? And because of that natural, real law of gravity that always pulls our heads away from seeing the big picture and pulls us down like so many ostrich heads into the sand, and because of the infinite number of invented rules that all too often we take for granted as being natural or even good, there's one thing that I guarantee we're all going to forget while we're playing the game, and that's the game. So this is a reminder. What if all of us here and everyone listening came up with their own method of reminding themselves and each other on a consistent basis of the game and the objective of the game, peace, and freeing each other from suffering, and made peace the most important idea worth spreading? I think it's the only chance that we have of winning. Remember, we are all in this together. Thank you.